Hi, my name is Dave Bodie for PremiumBeat.com, and in this lighting series we will be covering a variety of lighting instruments, lighting support, modifiers, tools, and accessories, and we will be going over a few different interview lighting setups. In this video, we will be talking about some basic characteristics of lighting instruments. When we talk about the color of a white lighting instrument, we are usually referencing two things: color temperature and CRI, or color rendering index. The color temperature of a light refers to a color characteristic of light that is measured in Kelvin. Sometimes you will hear it referred to as degrees Kelvin, but this has nothing to do with heat. In fact, the Kelvin scale works backwards in that as the number increases, the light will appear cooler. As it decreases, the light will appear warmer. The lower the number, the more orange and red the light will appear. The higher the number, the more bluish white the light will appear. Incandescent lights will usually have a color temperature of 3200 Kelvin if they are at full power and are not dimmed. Sometimes you will see long life incandescent lamps, and these almost always have a lower color temperature, around 3000 Kelvin. LEDs can be anywhere on the spectrum, but usually photo or video lights are around 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin or 3,000 Kelvin, depending on the model, and some can even mix between color temperatures. You will see fluorescent lamps for video lighting around 3200 or tungsten color, and you will see them around 4600 to 5600 in a daylight color. Usually the CRI from the higher color temperature fluorescent lamps is better than the lower color temperature lamps in all but the very highest end lighting units. HMIs are around 5600 K, but the color temp drops the longer the bulb is used. The color temperature of lights and your camera's white balance are important, especially when you have a situation where you have mixed color temperatures. If you are shooting near a window during the daytime, you will probably want to use lights that have a higher color temperature that is close to the outside color temp. This way, setting your camera white balance to daylight or somewhere in that neighborhood, things will look fairly natural. If you were to light the same scene with tungsten or incandescent light and white balance for that, the outside world would look like a blue alien world. Another thing to think about is something called color rendering index, often abbreviated as CRI. Essentially, this is a measurement of how a light source reproduces colors compared to an ideal source, like daylight sun, and it is measured on a scale from 0 to 100. Daylight sun would have a CRI of 100, and so do incandescent lights. Fluorescent, LED, and HMI are all less than 100, and the CRI is usually listed in the specs of the lighting instrument. Fluorescents, LEDs, and HMIs can also produce a colorcast. Colorcast is a tint of a particular color, usually unwanted, which affects the whole image. By using gels or filters, you can neutralize these color spikes to some degree. When using fluorescent or LED lights, I often use a minus green filter to help balance the light. This does affect the light output a bit, but is usually not something I worry about. Although you can do a bit of color correction in post-production, it's far easier to do it when you are shooting. The size of a light is also something that affects how your shot looks. The size of the light relative to the size of your subject dictates how hard or soft the shadows are. Hard shadows are shadows that transition from full shade to full exposure to the light in a very short area. Soft shadows have a much larger transition area. The sun is a massive object, but because it is almost 93 million miles away, it appears relatively small to humans. When the sky is clear and you are standing in open sun, the shadows will be sharp and well defined. On an overcast day, the shadows have a large gradation from dark to light. This is because the clouds are the lighting source, and relative to us, they are much larger than the sun. Lights that produce a hard shadow are sometimes called hard lights, and lights that produce a soft shadow are sometimes called soft lights. Most incandescent lighting instruments are hard lights because the filament is small. They can be made into a larger light source by using a diffuser or bouncing the beam off something else. In both cases, you are essentially making the diffuser or the bounce object the light source. As that source gets bigger, the shadows will get softer. Fluorescent units are usually softer than incandescent units because the actual lamps are much larger, and larger reflectors must be used in order to make them directional. There isn't a great way to make a fluorescent lighting instrument into a razor-sharp hard light. A single LED light is a hard light because it is very small, but most of the LED lighting instruments you will see use many LEDs, sometimes 1,000 or more, to get a usable light output. These end up working like 1,000 little hard lights and can make some really weird shadowing. A lot of times, these are used with a diffuser to combat this multi-shadow effect. You will see other LED units that look more like a traditional Fresnel, and these will function just like a hard light. One final thing to consider is about power. Incandescent lights draw a lot of power relative to the amount of light they produce. This means that you have to consider what you use on location. You do not want to overload circuits and pop breakers. You also may not have the luxury of knowing what else is on the circuit that you are trying to use, which further complicates things. In the United States, the two common household circuits are 15 amps and 20 amps at 110 volts. This means that on a 15 amp circuit, you can use a maximum of 1,650 watts. That should mean a 1 kilowatt and a 650 watt light, but that would be playing it super close to the edge, and you run a high risk of popping the breaker. A better idea would be to split up the lights and limit the load to 1,300 or 1,400 watts per 15 amp circuit. This way, if there is something else on the circuit, you won't be surprised. LEDs and fluorescent lights are much more efficient, and you won't run into as many problems using these on location in terms of power draw. Sometimes you may have electrical interference that may cause fluorescent lights to flicker. LEDs can even run on batteries, and it is very common to see a battery option on an LED lighting unit, including some that have higher outputs. So to sum it up, the four things you want to think about when using a light for a situation are: output. Is this light going to give me what I need? Color. Is this the right color temperature for the situation? And will it need any filtration to remove any color cast? Size. Will this light give me a hard or a soft shadow? And power. Will this light cause me trouble if I only have one or two circuits available?